My name is Heather Simmons, 32, and I once believed family always comes first. When my parents and brother needed a place to stay, I opened my home without hesitation. 10 months, $9,300 in bills, and countless sleepless nights later, I found myself sleeping in my car after my mother's cutting words. If you don't like living with family, you can leave. The irony wasn't lost on me. It was my house, my mortgage, my rules being trampled. Before I tell you how I finally stood up for myself, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever had to set boundaries with family. Trust me, what happened next changed everything. I've always been the responsible one in my family. After graduating college with honors, the first in our family to do so, I landed a job at Meridian Marketing where I worked my way up to senior marketing executive over 8 years. My parents, Walter and Dorothy, were proud but never quite understood the corporate world. My younger brother Kyle, for years my junior, took a different path, jumping between tech startups with periods of unemployment in between. Through careful budgeting and overtime projects, I saved enough for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom house in Oak Ridge, a nice suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and good schools. I loved my little sanctuary, with its small backyard where I planted tomatoes and herbs, and the sunroom where I drink coffee on weekend mornings. The extra bedroom served as my home office and a guest room that rarely saw visitors. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, bought and paid for with my own hard work. Family gatherings typically happened at my parents' place, a small 2-story home they'd bought 30 years ago. Sunday dinners were our tradition, with Mom's pot roast or Dad's grilled chicken bringing us together weekly. Kyle would sometimes bring girlfriends, and I occasionally invited friends. We weren't perfect, but we were close in that comfortable, low-maintenance way families can be when everyone has their own space. Everything changed last February. The tech industry experienced massive layoffs, and Kyle was among the casualties. That same month, Dad had a health scare. Not serious in the end, but enough to generate substantial medical bills not covered by their insurance. Their property taxes had increased, and suddenly, the mortgage they'd been managing for decades became untenable. I remember the Sunday dinner, when everything shifted. Instead of the usual laughter and casual conversation, an uncomfortable silence hung over the dining room. Mom's eyes were red-rimmed, Dad stared at his plate, and Kyle kept checking his phone nervously. "We need to talk about something," Dad finally said, his voice uncharacteristically small. "The bank sent a foreclosure notice yesterday." Mom started crying softly. "We tried everything, called everyone. Your Aunt Regina can't help. She's still paying for Cousin Megan's college. Uncle Timothy is underwater on his own mortgage." Kyle looked up from his phone. "My savings are gone. The severance wasn't much, and the job market is brutal right now." I sat there, fork frozen midway to my mouth, as the full picture emerged. My family was about to be homeless, with nowhere to turn. The solution seemed obvious to me then. "You can stay with me until you get back on your feet," I heard myself saying. "The guest room for you two, and Kyle can use the pull-out sofa. Just temporarily, of course, maybe 2 or 3 months until things stabilize." The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. Mom hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Dad's eyes welled with tears, and Kyle gave me a fist bump across the table. "We'll help with groceries and cleaning," Mom promised. "You won't even notice us there." "And I'll be job hunting full-time," Kyle added. "First paycheck I get, I'm contributing." "This is just until the insurance settlement comes through, and we can find a smaller place," Dad assured me. 3 months tops. We spent that evening planning the logistics. They would bring only essential belongings, storing the rest in Uncle Timothy's garage. Mom would cook dinner on weeknights, since I often worked late. Kyle would handle the yard work and take out the trash. Dad would help with minor repairs around the house that I'd been putting off. It felt like a reasonable plan, a family coming together in crisis. The move-in day went surprisingly smoothly. I cleared space in closets and drawers, put fresh linens on beds, and stocked the refrigerator. There was an almost festive atmosphere as we arranged furniture and unpacked essential items. That night, we ordered pizza and watched a movie together in the living room, everyone expressing gratitude and optimism about the future. For the first few weeks, things went according to plan. Mom cooked delicious meals, Dad fixed the leaky bathroom faucet and wobbly porch step, and Kyle kept the lawn looking neat. I adjusted my work schedule, taking early morning conference calls before everyone woke up. My boss Janet was understanding when I explained the situation, even offering flexibility for me to work from home more often. But small issues began to surface. I'd come home to find dishes piled in the sink, despite our agreement about cleaning up. Kyle's belongings gradually spread throughout the living room, creating a permanent lived-in look. My parents started rearranging kitchen cabinets without asking, insisting their system made more sense. The grocery bills doubled, then tripled. Premium coffee replaced my budget brand, organic vegetables filled the produce drawer, and name brand everything appeared in the pantry. When I gently mentioned this, Mom seemed hurt. "I thought you'd want us to feel at home. We're eating as a family now, so naturally, it costs more." Work calls became increasingly difficult to manage. My home office had excellent soundproofing, but Kyle's video games or my parents' television would often be loud enough to penetrate. More than once, I had to apologize to clients for background noise. My colleague Stephanie noticed my growing frustration during our weekly team check-ins. "Everything okay at home?" she asked after one particularly tense meeting. "Just adjusting to a full house," I replied, attempting to sound casual. "They'll be moving out soon." I still believed that then. I still had hope. As the 3-month mark approached, I began dropping subtle hints about the timeline we'd established. "Have you found any promising apartments yet?" I asked my parents over breakfast. "How's the job search going?" I questioned Kyle during commercial breaks of shows we watched together. The responses were vague and evasive. "The rental market is impossible right now," Mom would sigh. "Everything is either unaffordable or in dangerous neighborhoods." Dad would nod in agreement. "We're looking, sweetie, but at our age, we need to be careful about where we end up." Kyle was more direct in his dismissal. "I had 2 interviews last week, but one was commission-only sales, and the other wanted me to relocate to Phoenix. Not exactly ideal options." What he didn't mention, but I later discovered from his friend Taylor who visited, was that he'd been offered a decent position at a smaller tech company, but declined it because the salary was below what he felt he deserved. My work situation deteriorated rapidly. The quarterly marketing presentation, a crucial event where team members showcased their campaigns to the executive board, was approaching. I'd been preparing for weeks, staying late at the office to avoid the distractions at home. 2 days before the presentation, I needed to finalize my slides and practice my delivery. I came home early, planning to lock myself in my office for the evening. Instead, I found Kyle had moved his gaming setup into my workspace, complete with dual monitors and tangled cords everywhere. My desk had been pushed against the wall to make room for his elaborate chair. "What is this?" I asked, not bothering to hide my frustration. "Oh, hey," he said without removing his headset. "The Wi-Fi signal is stronger in here, and the living room was getting uncomfortable to sleep in every night. I figured you wouldn't mind since you're usually at the office anyway." I stood there, speechless, as he returned to his game, shouting commands to his online teammates. My files had been stacked haphazardly on the floor, and my ergonomic chair was nowhere to be seen. The next morning, I attempted to schedule a family meeting to discuss household issues. Mom dismissed the idea immediately. "Honey, we're family, not roommates. We don't need formal meetings to talk to each other." Her tone suggested I was being ridiculous for even suggesting it. I tried a different approach, creating a simple chore chart and leaving it on the refrigerator. It disappeared within hours. When I asked about it, Dad looked uncomfortable. "Your mother felt it was a bit insulting, like you're treating us like children." Meanwhile, my financial situation was becoming concerning. My carefully built savings, intended for eventual property investments or emergencies, was steadily decreasing. The utility bills had doubled with 3 additional adults in the house. Groceries now cost triple what I'd budgeted previously. When I checked my credit card statement, I noticed unfamiliar charges from gas stations and restaurants on days I'd been at work. Confronting Kyle about using my card without permission led to an indignant response. I was going to pay you back on payday, he insisted, though we both knew he didn't have a payday coming. It's not like you can't afford it. Besides, I needed to take Rachel out for her birthday. Rachel, his new girlfriend, had become an increasingly common presence in the house, staying for dinner and often overnight without any prior discussion. My bathroom counter became crowded with her cosmetics, and the hot water frequently ran out before my morning shower. During a rare lunch with my friend Jessica, I finally voiced my growing concerns. "You're being taken advantage of," she said bluntly, stirring her iced tea. "It's been almost 4 months, and they've made zero progress toward moving out. Meanwhile, they're treating your house like a hotel, and you like the staff. They're family," I protested weakly. "They're going through a tough time." Jessica's expression softened. "Look, I know you love them, but there's a difference between helping someone through a crisis and enabling them to avoid responsibility. Have they even looked at apartments recently?" I couldn't answer honestly, because I knew they hadn't. The situation reached a new low when my boss Diana called me into her office after the quarterly presentation, which hadn't gone well. I'd been unprepared and distracted, stumbling through slides I normally would have mastered. "Heather, is everything all right?"
This isn't like you.
Diana's concern was genuine. "Your performance has been slipping lately. The Johnson account numbers were late, and the creative for the Westfield campaign needed significant revisions." I considered making excuses, but opted for honesty. "I'm dealing with some family issues at home. It's been affecting my focus, but I'm handling it." Diana nodded sympathetically. "Family is important, but so is your career. You are on track for the associate director position this year. I'd hate to see that opportunity go to someone else." The warning was clear, though kindly delivered. My professional reputation, built over years of dedication and excellence, was at risk. That night, I tried once more to discuss the timeline with my parents, approaching the topic during dinner. "It's been 4 months now," I began carefully. "I'm wondering what progress we've made toward finding you a new place." Mom's expression immediately turned hurt. "Are you saying you want us out? After everything we've done for you your entire life?" "No, of course not, but we did agree this was temporary, and—" "Your father is still waiting on the insurance appeal," she interrupted. "And housing prices aren't going to magically drop overnight just because you're tired of having us around." Dad avoided eye contact, suddenly very interested in his mashed potatoes.
Kyle scoffed audibly.
"Wow, just wow," he muttered. "Real nice, sis." I retreated, as I always did when confronted with their unified disapproval. But that night, lying awake at 2 a.m., listening to Kyle and Rachel's laughter from the living room, I realized with painful clarity that my home no longer felt like mine. I had become a guest in my own house, walking on eggshells, afraid to disturb the new order of things. 6 months into what was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, I sat at my desk during lunch break and calculated exactly how much this family crisis had cost me. Utilities had increased by $450 monthly. Groceries now ran about $1,200 more per month than when I lived alone. There were car maintenance costs from Dad using my vehicle regularly, streaming service upgrades Kyle had insisted upon, and countless takeout meals ordered when everyone was too tired to cook. The total came to over $9,300 in additional expenses, not counting the emotional toll or professional setbacks. Kyle had finally found part-time work at a local electronics store, but his contribution to household expenses remained precisely zero. His paychecks disappeared into gaming equipment, dates with Rachel, and new clothes. When I broached the subject of rent or grocery money, he looked offended. "I'm saving up for my own place," he explained, as if this were perfectly reasonable. "The sooner I can move out, the sooner you get your precious space back." The irony that I was essentially funding his savings by covering all his living expenses seemed lost on him. Meanwhile, my parents had taken complete ownership of the house in ways that left me feeling like an intruder. Mom rearranged the living room furniture without discussion, claiming the new layout opened up the energy. Dad installed a satellite dish for special sports channels, drilling into the exterior walls without asking. The guest bathroom, once pristine and minimalist, now overflowed with their toiletries, towels, and medications. The final boundary dissolution came when extended family began visiting, without notice. I came home one Tuesday to find Aunt Regina and Uncle Timothy sitting in my living room, drinking my special occasion wine. Mom had prepared dinner for 6 using the expensive salmon I'd been saving for a work celebration.
Surprise.
Mom exclaimed. I thought it would be nice to have everyone together. I smiled stiffly, exhausted from a 10-hour workday and an hour-long commute, now faced with entertaining relatives until late evening. That night, I counted 5 missed calls from Diana about the quarterly budget projections I hadn't completed. The next morning, I faced the consequences. Diana's disappointment was evident as I fumbled through an explanation for my missed deadline. This is the 3rd time this quarter, Heather, she said, her tone measured but serious. The promotion committee meets next month. Right now, I can't confidently recommend you for advancement. My colleagues had noticed the change too. Stephanie no longer invited me to lunch, tired of my cancellations. Michael stopped asking for my input on creative briefs, knowing my responses would be delayed or distracted. I began using sick days not for actual illness, but to recover emotionally from the constant tension at home. The physical space had become unrecognizable. Cleaning responsibilities fell entirely to me, despite early promises of shared chores. I'd spend weekends scrubbing bathrooms, vacuuming floors, and doing mountains of laundry while my family relaxed, leaving dishes in the sink and clothes on the floor with casual disregard. Family meals, once a source of comfort, became another obligation. Mom would start dinner, but mysteriously disappear when it came time for cleanup. Kyle and Rachel would emerge from the living room just as food was served, eat quickly, and vanish again, leaving their plates for someone else to handle. My health began suffering noticeably. Insomnia became my nightly companion, with racing thoughts keeping me awake until dawn. Stress headaches occurred so frequently that I kept pain relievers in my desk, car, and purse. My clothes hung looser as my appetite diminished under constant anxiety. At my friend Jessica's insistence, I started seeing Dr. Pamela, a therapist specializing in family dynamics. During our second session, she asked a question that stopped me cold. Heather, when was the last time you felt truly comfortable in your own home? I couldn't remember. Dr. Pamela suggested direct communication with clear boundaries. Your generosity is admirable, she said, but martyrdom isn't sustainable. You need to advocate for yourself before resentment destroys your relationship with your family entirely. Armed with this perspective, I attempted a conversation with my mother the following weekend. I found her alone in the kitchen, preparing lunch. Mom, can we talk about the living situation? It's been 6 months now, and we haven't discussed any progress toward your and Dad's plans. She continued chopping vegetables without looking up. What is there to discuss? We're fine where we are. But this was supposed to be temporary. I pressed gently. I'm struggling with a financial burden and lack of personal space. Mom put down the knife and turned to face me, expression hardening. So this is about money? After everything we sacrificed to raise you? Do you know how many meals I skipped so you could have new school clothes? How many extra shifts your father worked to pay for your college applications? This familiar guilt trip left me speechless. Dad entered the kitchen, catching the end of Mom's statement. What's going on? He asked, looking between us uneasily. Heather thinks we're a burden, Mom said, tears welling up. She wants to know our exit strategy. I tried to explain. Dad, that's not what We don't have anywhere else to go right now, he interrupted, voice quiet but firm. The insurance appeal was denied, and the housing market is impossible. I thought you understood that. The conversation ended there, with me apologizing for bringing it up and retreating to my room, feeling like the villain in their narrative. Kyle's response when I attempted a similar conversation was even more dismissive. You've changed, he accused, arms crossed defensively. You used to care about family. Now all you care about is your fancy job and your perfect little house. The fact that my fancy job was funding his lifestyle and my perfect house was providing his shelter seemed irrelevant to him. The final insult came when I discovered Rachel had been staying over 5 nights a week, using my utilities, eating my food, and occupying my space without contributing anything. She's practically family now, Kyle shrugged when confronted. Her roommate situation is toxic, so she feels safer here. I swallowed my response, knowing it would only lead to another accusation of selfishness. That night, I called Jessica and sobbed into the phone for an hour, overwhelmed by the impossible situation. "You need to do something drastic," she advised. "They're not going to change as long as the current arrangement works for them." The truth of her words sank in slowly, painfully. In trying to help my family, I had created a situation that harmed all of us, enabling their dependence while breeding my resentment. Something had to give before I lost my job, my health, and what remained of my relationship with my family. I just didn't expect it would happen quite so dramatically. The 8-month mark arrived with a startling announcement over breakfast. Kyle stood at the head of the dining table, arm around Rachel, both beaming with excitement. "We have some news," he declared, as if introducing a pregnancy or engagement. "Rachel's moving in permanently. Her lease is up next week, and it makes sense financially for her to just live here." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Permanently? But you're not even permanent." The room went silent. Mom recovered first, clapping her hands together. "That's wonderful news. We have plenty of room, don't we, Heather?" They all looked at me expectantly, waiting for my enthusiastic approval of this further invasion of my space. I managed a weak nod before excusing myself, claiming a work emergency that didn't exist. In my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel, I realized they had no intention of ever leaving. My home had been completely colonized, my boundaries obliterated, my generosity stretched beyond recognition. I drove to work in a daze, unable to focus on anything but the growing knot of anxiety in my chest. That evening, I discovered another violation. My grandmother's antique jewelry box, one of the few family heirlooms I treasured, lay on my dresser with a broken hinge. Inside, my carefully organized pieces were jumbled together, several missing entirely. When I confronted my mother, her dismissive response was the first crack in the dam of my composure. "It's just an old box, Heather. I needed something to store my medication samples, and it was sitting there collecting dust. I'm sure the hinge was already loose." "And my missing earrings?" I asked, voice tight. She shrugged. "Rachel might have borrowed them for her job interview. Girls share things, you know." The casual disregard for my possessions, my privacy, my very identity in my own home sent a wave of clarity through the fog of obligation and guilt. This wasn't family supporting each other through crisis. This was exploitation disguised as familial closeness. Other violations came into sharp focus. My bedroom door, which I always closed when leaving, was repeatedly open when I returned. Personal mail had been opened and left on the kitchen counter. My journal, hidden in my nightstand drawer, had clearly been moved, its contents becoming fodder for family discussions about my attitude problem. Work documents went missing, only to reappear in strange locations like the bathroom cabinet or under couch cushions. My laptop charger vanished for days, leaving me scrambling to borrow equipment for important presentations. The boundaries between my professional and personal life completely dissolved, with family members answering my phone during client calls or reading my work emails over my shoulder. The final confrontation began innocently enough. After a particularly grueling workday where Diana had pulled me aside for another conversation about performance concerns, I came home craving just 1 hour of solitude. The house was unusually quiet, and I seized the opportunity to soak in a hot bath with a glass of wine, a simple pleasure I hadn't enjoyed in months. 15 minutes into my rare moment of peace, the bathroom door burst open. Kyle walked in without hesitation, reaching for his electric razor on the counter. "Need to clean up for date night," he explained, seemingly oblivious to my shocked expression and attempts to maintain modesty beneath the bubbles. "Kyle, get out," I shouted, sloshing water as I reached for a towel. He rolled his eyes but left, door wide open. I could hear him complaining loudly to Rachel about my overreaction. That night at dinner, with everyone present including Rachel, I attempted a calm, reasonable discussion about basic respect and personal space. I need some privacy and boundaries, I began, keeping my voice steady. We're all adults sharing a space, and certain considerations should be common courtesy. I might as well have announced I was selling the house out from under them. What followed wasn't a discussion but an intervention against me. You've become so selfish since you got this house, Kyle accused, pointing his fork for emphasis. It's like you've forgotten where you came from, who supported you. Rachel nodded sympathetically, despite having known me for only a few months and contributing nothing to the household. Dad stared at his plate, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. It was my mother's response that shattered any remaining illusions I had about our family dynamic. If you don't like living with family, you can leave, she said coldly, eyes narrowing. This constant complaining about space and money and privacy, it's unbecoming. We're your family. Act like it. The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. I felt something break inside me, a fundamental trust that family meant support in both directions, not just sacrifice flowing from me to them. This is my house, I said quietly, voice trembling with emotion. My name is on the mortgage. I've paid every bill for 8 months while all of you lived here for free. Mom's expression hardened further. And there it is, the real Heather. Always keeping score, always thinking about herself first. I always told your father you had a cold personality, but I hoped family would warm you up. Kyle nodded in agreement. Seriously, sis. You used to be cool. What happened to you? Dad remained silent, his absence of defense speaking volumes. The family I had sacrificed so much to help now united in painting me as the villain for simply asking for basic respect in my own home. I stood up from the table, legs unsteady, and walked directly to the front door. The cool evening air hit my face as I stepped onto the porch, tears finally breaking free after months of suppression. My car beckoned, the only private space left in my life. Inside the vehicle, I reclined the driver's seat and sobbed until no more tears would come. Hours passed as I sat there in the driveway, watching lights go out in the house one by one. Eventually, exhaustion overcame distress, and I drifted into uneasy sleep right there in the car. The sunrise woke me, stiff and uncomfortable, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. As I watched the golden light spread across my neighborhood, a neighborhood I had worked so hard to join, a decision crystallized in my mind. This couldn't continue. Something fundamental had to change, and since my family wouldn't change their behavior, I would have to change the situation entirely. With that resolution, I started my car and drove away, not yet certain of my destination, but absolutely certain of my purpose. The time for enabling was over. The time for action had arrived. I spent that day in a coffee shop across town, laptop open, methodically creating a plan to reclaim my life. My first call was to Melanie, the financial advisor who had guided me through my home purchase 3 years earlier. $9,000 in additional expenses over 8 months is significant, she confirmed after reviewing my spreadsheets. Not to mention the potential impact on your career advancement. From a purely financial perspective, this situation is unsustainable. We discussed options for several hours. The house was solely in my name, which simplified matters legally, but complicated them emotionally. Melanie recommended a consultation with Sandra, a real estate attorney, who agreed to see me that afternoon. You have every legal right to require them to vacate your property, Sandra explained, her office a calm contrast to the chaos of my home. As the sole owner, you can issue a formal notice giving them reasonable time to find alternative housing. What's considered reasonable? I asked, taking detailed notes. 30 days is standard, though courts often look favorably on property owners who provide additional time for family members, especially older parents. Documentation of the original agreement and subsequent financial impact strengthens your position if they contest. I nodded, already drafting a notice in my mind. And if they refuse to leave after the notice period? Sandra's expression turned serious. Then formal eviction proceedings would be necessary. It's a last resort, especially with family, but understanding your legal options provides leverage in what will likely be an emotional conversation. Armed with this knowledge, I made my third important call of the day to Tiffany, a real estate agent Jessica had recommended. I need a small apartment, available immediately, preferably furnished. Budget is flexible, but security is essential. Tiffany worked quickly, sending listings to my email within hours. During my lunch break the next day, I viewed 3 properties, settling on a 1-bedroom unit in a secure building with keycard access and 24-hour concierge. The rent was higher than I'd hoped, but the peace of mind seemed worth every penny. "How soon can I move in?" I asked, standing in the empty living room that already felt more like home than my house had in months. "The owner is eager. We could have paperwork completed by tomorrow, keys in your hand by the weekend," Tiffany replied. That evening, instead of going home, I drove to a storage facility and rented a unit. Over the next 3 days, during work hours when I knew the house would be empty, I systematically removed irreplaceable items, family photographs, important documents, sentimental treasures, and essential work materials. Each item went either to storage or my new apartment, which I furnished minimally with online orders delivered directly there. Jessica helped with logistics, meeting delivery people, and organizing the apartment while I maintained appearances at work and home. "This is like a covert operation," she commented as we arranged kitchenware in my new space. "It feels like one," I admitted. I never thought I'd be sneaking around my own house, afraid to move my own possessions. My neighbor Marcus, a retired police officer who had always been friendly, agreed to keep an occasional eye on my house once I moved out. "Family situations can get complicated," he acknowledged when I explained vaguely. "I'll let you know if anything seems concerning." Dr. Pamela provided crucial emotional support during this preparation phase. "What you're doing isn't abandonment," she assured me during an emergency session. "It's establishing necessary boundaries after numerous attempts at reasonable communication. The guilt you're feeling is natural, but not warranted." At work, I confided in Diana about the situation, explaining the impact it had been having on my performance. Her response surprised me with its compassion. "Take 3 days of personal leave next week," she offered. "Get yourself settled, then come back focused. The promotion committee meeting has been delayed until quarter end, which gives you time to demonstrate your usual excellence." The final piece fell into place with a bank transfer, the security deposit, and first month's rent for my apartment, plus a small emergency fund in a new account my family couldn't access. As I confirmed the transaction from my office computer, a weight lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt in control of my own life. That night, I prepared mentally for the confrontation to come. I rehearsed what I would say, anticipated their responses, and planned my counters to the emotional manipulation I knew would follow. The dinner I cooked was normal, giving no indication of the bombshell I would drop the next morning. As I lay in bed that final night in my house, surrounded by family who had forgotten how to be family, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The path forward was clear, even if it wouldn't be easy. Tomorrow would be difficult, but the day after promised something I had almost forgotten existed: freedom in my own life. The morning light filtered through my bedroom curtains as I finalized the documents spread across my desk. A formal 30-day notice to vacate, printed on legal letterhead from Sandra's office. A detailed accounting of expenses incurred during their stay. Photographs documenting the current condition of the property. A reasonable but firm timeline for transition. My hands trembled slightly, but my resolve remained steady. I dressed professionally, as if for an important business meeting, which in many ways this was. The scent of coffee and bacon drifted up from the kitchen. Mom always cooked elaborate weekend breakfasts, one of the few contributions that had remained consistent. I descended the stairs, documents in a folder tucked under my arm, to find the entire family gathered around the dining table. Kyle and Rachel sat close together, sharing sections of the newspaper. Dad worked on a crossword puzzle, while Mom served platters of food. The domestic scene might have been heartwarming if it hadn't been built entirely on my sacrifice. "Good morning," I said, my voice calmer than I expected. "Before we eat, there's something important we need to discuss." Mom looked up, spatula in hand. Can it wait until after breakfast? The eggs will get cold.
No, y replied firmly.
It can't wait any longer. Something in my tone silenced the usual deflections. I took a seat at the head of the table, my table, and placed the folder in front of me. I've made a decision about our living arrangement. I began, maintaining eye contact with each of them in turn. This situation has become unsustainable for me, both financially and emotionally. Kyle scoffed, but I continued before he could interrupt. This is a formal 30-day notice to vacate the property, I said, removing the document and placing it in the center of the table. I've also prepared an itemized list of expenses I've covered during your stay, totaling over $9,000 and documentation of property damage that's occurred. The shock on their faces might have been comical under different circumstances. Mom's mouth opened and closed without sound. Dad's crossword puzzle lay forgotten. Rachel looked uncomfortably at Kyle, whose face flushed with anger. You can't be serious, he finally sputtered. Where are we supposed to go with just 30 days' notice? The same place you were planning to go when you agreed to stay here temporarily 8 months ago, I replied evenly. I've provided a list of affordable housing options on the second page, including senior living communities with immediate availability for Mom and Dad and apartment complexes currently offering move-in specials. Mom found her voice, immediately shifting to the familiar territory of guilt and manipulation. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Throwing your own parents onto the street like garbage. I'm not throwing anyone onto the street, I countered, prepared for this exact argument. I'm giving reasonable notice and options for transition, which is more consideration than any of you showed when making decisions that affected my home, my career, and my well-being. Dad finally spoke, surprise evident in his expression. Heather, surely we can discuss this. We're family. We have discussed it repeatedly for months. Every attempt at reasonable conversation has been dismissed or twisted to make me the villain for simply asking for respect in my own home. I turned to face my mother directly. Last night, you told me if I don't like living with family, I can leave. But this is my house, my mortgage, my investment. I'm not leaving, but you need to. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Kyle pushing back from the table violently, chair scraping against hardwood. This is bullshit, he declared. You've become some corporate robot who cares more about money than her own family. This isn't about money, I replied, maintaining my composure. It's about boundaries and mutual respect, neither of which have existed in this house for months. I've subsidized your lifestyle while you've contributed nothing, not financially, not through chores, not even basic courtesy. Rachel, looking increasingly uncomfortable, tugged at Kyle's sleeve. Maybe we should go for a walk, cool down a bit. He shook her off. No, I want to hear how Sister of the Year justifies this. I opened the folder again, removing a second document. I'm willing to provide reasonable moving assistance, including 2 weeks of hotel accommodation if needed, and a partial security deposit for your next residence. This offer is contingent on the property being vacated in the condition documented here, with all belongings removed by the specified date. Mom burst into tears, the dramatic sobs I recognized from childhood disagreements. My own daughter, treating us like strangers. What will people think? They'll think what they already know, that I opened my home to help family through a crisis, and that help was taken advantage of until boundaries became necessary. The conversation deteriorated from there, cycling through predictable patterns of accusation, guilt-tripping, and attempts to renegotiate. I remained firm, referring back to the documented agreement and timeline. After an exhausting 2 hours, I excused myself, explaining that I had errands to run. You can review the documents, and we can discuss any practical questions tomorrow, I said, gathering my purse. The decision itself is not negotiable. As expected, the fallout was immediate and intense. Within hours, my phone exploded with messages from extended family. Aunt Regina expressed shock at my cruelty. Uncle Timothy suggested I needed professional help for my selfish tendencies. Cousins I barely spoke to weighed in with their disapproval. On social media, Vague posts appeared alluding to ungrateful children and family betrayal, strategically designed to garner sympathy without providing context. I muted notifications and focused on finalizing arrangements for my temporary relocation to Jessica's guest room until the situation stabilized. The following days brought escalating attempts to undermine my decision. Mom accidentally broke a vase that had belonged to my grandmother. Kyle announced loudly that they might need more time than the notice provided. Dad made tearful appeals to family harmony while taking no actual steps toward finding alternative housing. Through it all, I maintained the boundary I had established. When emotional manipulation failed, threats emerged. Kyle suggested they might simply refuse to leave, forcing me into costly legal proceedings. Mom hinted that certain family heirlooms might disappear during the move. Dad raised concerns about his health deteriorating from the stress of relocation. I responded by having the formal notice delivered by certified mail, documenting the property's condition with dated photographs, and installing security cameras in common areas after informing everyone of their presence. My attorney advised these precautionary measures might seem excessive for family, but were entirely reasonable given the circumstances. The final countdown to the vacancy deadline began with a mixture of tension and grudging progress. Mom and Dad located a senior apartment complex with an immediate opening, though they complained constantly about its smaller size and distance from their friends. Kyle and Rachel found a roommate situation they could afford, though he insisted repeatedly that it was beneath his professional status. I stayed with Jessica during this transition period, visiting the house only to check on progress and ensure no further damage occurred. The distance provided clarity I hadn't experienced in months, reinforcing that my decision, while difficult, was absolutely necessary for my well-being. The day before the deadline, I returned to find boxes stacked in the entryway and a surprising level of compliance with the move-out terms. Dad acknowledged me with a nod that contained more resignation than anger. Mom maintained cool distance, but had clearly been packing systematically. Kyle and Rachel were already gone, having moved their belongings out the previous evening without saying goodbye. "We'll be out by noon tomorrow," Dad said quietly as I inspected the nearly empty guest room. "The cleaning service is scheduled for the afternoon." I nodded, surprised by this unexpected consideration. "Thank you." He hesitated, looking older and more vulnerable than I remembered. "This isn't how I wanted things to end up." "It doesn't have to be an ending," I replied carefully. "Just a necessary reset of boundaries." He didn't respond, but something in his expression suggested he understood more than he was willing to acknowledge aloud. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but perhaps the first step toward a healthier relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. The next day, standing alone in my empty, freshly cleaned house for the first time in nearly a year, I felt no triumph or vindication, only relief and the quiet certainty that I had done what was necessary to reclaim not just my space, but my identity and self-respect. 6 months after reclaiming my home, the transformation in my life was profound. My new living situation, back in my own house after the thorough cleaning and minor repairs, felt like a sanctuary. I had repainted the walls, rearranged furniture, and implemented small changes that reclaimed the space as distinctly mine. The guest bedroom became a reading nook with a comfortable daybed for occasional visitors who respected boundaries. My home office returned to its former efficiency, supporting my renewed professional focus. At work, my performance rebounded quickly. Diana noticed the change immediately, commenting on my renewed energy and attention to detail. The promotion to Associate Marketing Director came through during the next quarterly review, accompanied by a significant salary increase and expanded responsibilities. My colleagues remarked on my comeback, though few knew the personal struggles behind my previous performance issues. Therapy with Dr. Pamela continued, focusing now on healing rather than crisis management. Family relationships are particularly challenging because they're entangled with our core identity, she explained during one session. You're doing the difficult work of redefining those relationships on healthier terms. The aftermath with my family unfolded gradually. My parents settled into their senior apartment, initially maintaining minimal contact punctuated by occasional guilt-laden messages. Kyle and Rachel's roommate situation dissolved after 2 months, leading to separate apartments and eventually a breakup when financial realities strained their relationship. My brother's experience with genuine independence proved unexpectedly transformative. Forced to manage his own expenses and household responsibilities for the first time at 30, he struggled initially, but slowly developed competencies he'd avoided for years. Our communication remained limited to holiday text messages for the first 3 months, then gradually expanded to occasional coffee meetings on neutral ground. During one such meeting, Kyle surprised me with an observation. "I get it now," he said, stirring his latte thoughtfully. "The budget stuff, the cleaning schedules, all the things you tried to explain. It's different when it's all on you." It wasn't quite an apology, but it represented growth I hadn't anticipated. "It's a lot to manage," I acknowledged. "How's the new job going?" He'd finally accepted a position below his ideal salary but with growth potential and stability. "It's actually good. My boss says I have untapped potential if I can improve my follow-through." I smiled, recognizing the familiar feedback. "You've always had potential. You just needed the right motivation to apply it." Our relationship remained tentative, but was evolving towards something healthier than before. A connection based on adult mutual respect rather than enabling or dependence. My parents' journey took longer. Mom maintained her position that I had betrayed family loyalty, though her communications gradually shifted from accusatory to informative. Dad reached out more directly, initially with practical questions about home maintenance or bills, then eventually with genuine inquiry about my life and well-being. For months after the move, he invited me to lunch without Mom. Sitting across from him at a quiet cafe, I saw weariness, but also a new clarity in his eyes. "Your mother won't admit it," he said after our food arrived, but this separation was necessary. "We'd stopped functioning as independent adults, relying on you instead of facing our situation honestly." I nodded, careful not to interrupt this rare moment of transparency. "I've started part-time work at the hardware store," he continued. "Nothing fancy, but it supplements the retirement income. And we've met neighbors who actually check in on us, form real friendships. We were isolated before, using you as our only social connection." "I'm glad you're finding your way," I said sincerely. "That's all I wanted, for everyone to stand on their own feet again." He reached across the table, briefly squeezing my hand. "I should have supported you more. When everything happened, I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. I'm sorry for that." That simple acknowledgement meant more than elaborate apologies might have. It represented accountability, the recognition that healing required honesty about what had happened. My mother's perspective shifted more gradually. The turning point came unexpectedly through my Aunt Regina, who had initially been among my harshest critics. After visiting my parents' new apartment and seeing their improved situation, she called me. "I think I misjudged what was happening," she admitted. "They're actually doing better now, more active, more engaged. Your mother even joined a book club, something she'd never have done before." 2 weeks later, Mom called with an invitation to Sunday dinner at their apartment. The conversation remained superficial, focused on neighborhood news and distant relatives, but underneath ran an unspoken acknowledgement that our relationship was changing, potentially for the better. As for me, personal growth continued in unexpected ways. I rediscovered hobbies abandoned during the months of family chaos: photography, hiking, community theater. My social circle expanded beyond work colleagues and Jessica to include neighbors, fellow volunteers at a housing security nonprofit I joined, and members of a book club focused on personal development. Dating entered my life again, cautiously at first. My experience had made me more aware of relationship dynamics, more attentive to early warning signs of boundary issues. Through a cooking class, I met Ethan, an architectural engineer whose respect for personal space and clear communication felt refreshingly healthy. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual independence and choice rather than obligation or rescue fantasies. The most profound change was internal, a fundamental shift in how I defined family obligations and personal boundaries. I no longer equated sacrifice with love or viewed boundary enforcement as selfishness. Instead, I recognized that truly supportive relationships required reciprocity and respect. During a session with Dr. Pamela marking 1 year since the family crisis began, she asked about my biggest lesson from the experience. I learned the difference between helping and enabling. I reflected. Real help empowers someone to solve their own problems. Enabling just postpones inevitable growth and creates dependency. I was enabling my family out of guilt and obligation, calling it love when it was actually fear. And what about forgiveness? She asked. Where are you with that aspect? I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness isn't forgetting or pretending harm didn't occur. For me, it's about releasing the expectation that the past should have been different. My family acted according to patterns established long before this crisis. Understanding that helps me move forward without bitterness. This perspective informed my approach to rebuilding family relationships, with clear boundaries, reasonable expectations, and the courage to maintain both even when uncomfortable. Monthly dinners with my parents became part of our new normal, with my home and theirs as alternating neutral territory where new patterns could form. Kyle and I developed a relationship based on adult siblinghood rather than caretaking. We celebrated his promotion to project manager and his renewed independence, connecting through shared interests rather than crisis management. Looking ahead, I made plans to potentially purchase a small rental property, turning the difficult financial lessons of the past into future security. I mentored junior colleagues facing their own family boundary challenges, sharing perspective without oversharing personal details. The final healing came in redefining family itself, expanding beyond blood relations to include chosen connections based on mutual respect and genuine care. Family wasn't simply who shared your DNA or your roof, but who honored your humanity while supporting your growth. As I drove home from dinner with my parents on a cool autumn evening, exactly 1 year after the night I'd slept in my car, I reflected on the journey. The road had been painful but necessary, leading not to the destruction of family bonds but to their reconstruction on healthier foundations. In setting boundaries, I hadn't rejected my family. I had simply created the conditions where authentic connection became possible. The house waiting for me was peaceful now, filled with objects and spaces that reflected my values and supported my well-being. It was mine again, but I was ready to share it, on my terms, with those who demonstrated respect and reciprocity. Have you ever had to make difficult decisions about boundaries with people you love? The hardest lessons often come from situations where doing the right thing feels wrong at first. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of growth through challenge. Share in the comments how you've navigated family boundaries in your own life. Your experience might help someone else finding their way through similar struggles. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, true family supports your growth, not just your giving.